A piece of anti-landlord legislation passed the Colorado House over the weekend that would cap the amount that landlords could ask for income requirements for new rentals. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's an update to a video that I did a little while back about this proposal in Colorado, basically where they would cap the amount that landlords could require for income, for their income requirements for rentals. Okay, so this is a very, very, very dumb idea, and it's passed. It passed the Colorado House. Now, I believe there are some more steps that it'll have to go through before it becomes a state law, and I hope that it doesn't get that far because this is one of the worst things they could possibly put in place. They're basically saying, hey, we want to make it so that landlords accept tenants who can't afford to live in the rentals. What do they think is going to happen? It's going to lead to a lot more people defaulting on the amount, that they owe for rent. So if a person can't afford $1,000 a month rent, then they don't need to be in $1,000 a month apartment. Okay, this is absolutely ridiculous. Yet they want to stick landlords with these tenants who are too broke and too poor to afford their units because they feel bad for the tenants. Well, that is dumb. That is absolutely dumb. Just like when you go out and buy a new house, the bank will only lend you the amount of money that you can actually afford to pay. And the banks have tons of requirements for that. And you know what? The bank doesn't get screwed over by the government. The government doesn't step in and say, well, you know what? We think that, this person who makes minimum wage can afford a $500,000 house. No, the government needs to stop interfering in other people's business. In my opinion, they are doing too much. This is overreach. And hopefully this law doesn't pass. But you know what? That's not the only thing. They're also going to be limiting the amount that landlords can charge for security deposits. So they want to make this as bad as possible for landlords, okay? And you know what? I've been talking about Colorado a lot lately because a lot of these anti-landlord laws are being proposed there. Now, obviously, rent control, it got stripped out of that other bill recently, but how long before that sort of thing passes as well? Yeah, so this is disastrous. I hope that this doesn't pass, but we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if it did. I don't think anyone here, would be surprised either. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. What do you think of Colorado capping the amount that landlords can ask in terms of income requirements? I know that I require my tenants to make more than 3 times the monthly rent in order to rent one of my units. So if the rent in my unit is $1,000, they have to make at least $3,000 a month to qualify to rent it, because that is the bare minimum in order to actually afford to live in my property so that, I don't get screwed over. I want to be able to get my rent payment every single month. I'm not going to put somebody in there who only makes $2,000. And then when, they can't pay their bills, they're like, well, I'm just not going to pay my landlord. That's dumb. Okay. So you're setting landlords up for a bad situation. Now, sometimes you have tenants who are especially risky, maybe people who have evictions on their record, people who, just have recently got a new job, and you might want to charge that person a little bit higher of a security deposit. So the other part of this same legislation says that now landlords are capped on how much they can charge for security deposit. So, yeah, this bill does landlords no good. But anyway, let's get into the article and see what it says. This article is coming from Denver7.com, and it says, proposed legislation capping income requirements for Colorado renters causes concern for some landlords. And it has a video that goes with it. I'm going to play that video for you right now.
News: if you are a tenant in Colorado, Senate Bill 184 passed this weekend, and it'll offer a lot more protection for tenants in the state.
I've seen, just high rent rates just all across the board.
Riley Fox just moved to Colorado a few months ago. He says it was a hassle finding an affordable place to live.
The requirements on top of it, it just makes it seem so much harder to find a place successfully.
Now some relief is on the way for him and other renters in the state. Saturday, the House passed Senate Bill 184. Here's what it would do. First, a renter wouldn't have to make as much money to qualify for a place, and landlords can't charge as much for security deposits. This is because it caps minimum income requirements to twice the cost of monthly rent. It also caps security deposits to 2 months worth of rent.
People who are only making so much money because, wages are not rising with, equivalent to the expenses of living these days.
State Representative Meg Froelich, a prime sponsor of this bill, says it couldn't come at a better time.
Our rents are really high. The folks who can't afford to pay a deposit of 3 times their monthly rent are teachers, first responders, and folks we want living in our community.
Meanwhile, landlords say they have concerns.
And frankly, I don't see why the government at all should be telling a landlord what the criteria should be. You're putting landlords in a very difficult position.
But for Riley, the bill
really helpful in terms of, budgeting and just, just overall affordability.
Supporters of this legislation say these changes will also help prevent landlords from discriminating against people who use housing vouchers. Reporting in Denver, I'm Christian Lopez, Denver 7.
All right, you saw that video. Now, let's get into this article. Colorado renters living with lower incomes may soon have more housing options opening up after the House passed SB 184 over the weekend, but some landlords say it may lead to an increase in defaults. The bill now heads to the governor's desk where its fate is unknown. So, looking at the people in the video, right? They talk to a tenant, and to me, the things that tenant were saying were very, they were talking about, oh, well, I personally, it's very difficult for me to afford this and that and whatever, right? And I'm sitting here like, yeah, that's true. However, we're not talking about you here. We're talking about tenants throughout the entire state. We're talking about landlords and their properties in order to make sure that they are safe and secure and that they're able to make a profit. They have to do these things. Now, I know that you want what's best just for you, okay? But when we're passing a piece of legislation like this that makes every single landlord across the entire state, no matter what the personal situation of each tenant and landlord is, comply with these rules, well, that's overreach, okay? You personally might be a great tenant, but what about that tenant over there who has been evicted from 4 different places and wants to move into a new apartment? Well, that tenant might have to pay a much higher security deposit than a regular tenant. Okay. And what about, the tenant who is just barely scraping by, who has defaulted on their rent many different times? Do you think that tenant doesn't need at least to make 3 times the monthly income before a landlord should rent to them? Or do you think a landlord should, I just take a chance on this crappy tenant? Well, see, that's the problem. New legislation rarely takes into consideration a crappy tenant. The only thing they think about is, good tenants might have a little bit more trouble. Well, a good tenant, if they need to, they're going to make a way and they're going to be just fine. I know this. Bad tenants, on the other hand, they're going to look for every single possible way to sneak in there and then screw landlords over. This is why I don't support this sort of legislation. Supporters say the legislation will offer more protections for tenants by capping minimum income requirements to twice the amount of monthly rent. Right now, many landlords require tenants to make at least 3 times what they charge for rent. I do that. All the landlords I know do at least 3 times. In some places, 4 times. Some places more than that. Okay? It should be up to our discretion. Period. Not the government. When the government steps in and tells businesses how they should operate, right? Imagine if they did this to the bank and they went to the bank and they said, hey, if a person wants to buy $1 million house, it's okay if they only make 10 grand a year. Well, the bank is going to lose a ton of money making loans to those people because those people will not be able to pay. Okay, that's just the truth. So it's the same thing. Essentially, they are dictating to us how we rent our properties out. And the way that they are forcing us to do it does not make financial sense. Doesn't make common sense either, but that nothing, when it comes to bureaucrats, right, nothing makes common sense. It's like they live in this fantasy world where everything will work perfect because that's what they wrote down on the sheet of paper. They don't take into consideration human psychology. They don't take into consideration unintended consequences, okay? What is an unintended consequence of passing a law like this? Well, basically, more people default, and then more people end up getting evicted. And so then we have all these evictions going on, and then the state comes back like, well, why are landlords evicting so many people? Well, because more people are not paying their rent because we were forced to let in people who couldn't afford to live in our units. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think the end result is? More people are actually going to end up in the units? Well, maybe, maybe not. Or landlords might find some other way to make their criteria more strict. That's what I would do. Like, oh, well, you know what? If they will only allow us to cap the income at this amount, well, we're going to go and we're going to say, well, people have to have a 750 credit score. Okay. Oh, then they'll come back. Well, you can't use credit score anymore. Well, then we're going to do this or we're going to do that. Landlords always find a way to work around these stupid laws when they start, putting them into place. And if we can't, guess what we do? We get out of the business. We leave. We're just like, you know what? This is idiotic. I just don't want to deal with it anymore. So hopefully the governor looks at this and makes a wise decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. So bad stuff coming out of Colorado lately.